Welcome to this course on full stack application development with Angular and Spring Boot from in 28 minutes. I am Ranga Karanam. I have more than 20 years of application development experience with a variety of languages like Java, Python, JavaScript, and a variety of frameworks like REST API frameworks like Spring Boot and front-end frameworks like Angular. At in 28 minutes, we ask ourselves one question every day. How do we create more amazing course experiences? The success we had on a variety of platforms, including Udemy, with more than 200,000 learners, is a result of this pursuit of excellence. We love programming and we think full stack application development is one of the most important skills for a developer today. In this awesome course with more than 100 steps, you will understand how to build a to-do management application step by step, connecting an Angular frontend to a Spring Boot REST API. We focus extensively on Angular during this course and help you learn the basics of modules, components, data binding and routing with Angular. We'll also help you implement forms with validations. We would execute a number of REST API calls from the Angular front end. We'll make extensive use of the dependency injection capabilities of the Angular framework. We'll use Spring Security to secure our RESTful API, and we would use two different approaches. Number one, basic authentication. Number two, JWT or JOT, JSON Web Token. We would expect you to know the basics of Java programming, a bit of JavaScript programming experience, and a little bit of experience working with dependency injection with the Spring framework. We would be helping you to install all the tools that you would need for this course. The complete source code and step-by-step details of what we would be doing during this course will be available on our GitHub repository. What are you waiting for? Let's have some fun developing a full stack web application with Angular and Spring Boot. We had a lot of fun creating this course for you, and we are sure you would have a lot of fun too. If you want to learn more, go ahead and click the enroll button, or you can take a test drive by using the free preview feature. Good luck, and I'll see you in the course. Welcome back. In this step, we would want to help you get quickly started with this course. The first thing I would want to do is to congratulate you on making a great decision in choosing this course. Now, let's get down to getting started with the course. The first thing you would need to do is to bookmark the GitHub repository of this course. You'll find a link to it in the resources section of the video you are watching. You just need to hover over to the left top corner of your screen and you should see a resources and a link to the GitHub repository. Just click it and launch the GitHub repository and bookmark the URL. The GitHub repository contains links to all the installation videos, step-by-step details of the course, and the source code. Also present is backup of all the code at various points. For example, this is the last backup, this is the final backup of the code in this specific course. You'd see that the entire code is present as a single file, so that if you face a problem, you can use this as a reference. You can look at how it is done here and check how you are approaching it. The first two sections of this course would extensively focus on Angular. The two tools you would need for that section is NPM and Visual Studio Code. We can install Java and Eclipse a little later. For now, you can launch this playlist, which would help us to install Node.js, which is NPM, and Visual Studio Code. This playlist contains 3 steps: installing Node.js and NPM, quick introduction to NPM, and installing Visual Studio Code. I would recommend to pause the video in here and continue with the installation of Node.js and Visual Studio Code. If you have successfully installed Node.js and Visual Studio Code, you are now all set to rock the Angular world. If you are a Java developer, the first few steps can be overwhelming. You will be using a new language, modern JavaScript and TypeScript. You will be using a new IDE, Visual Studio Code. You'll be using a new framework, Angular, with a new tool, Angular CLI, which is used to create Angular projects. The first 7 steps contain a little bit of theory to introduce you to the various parts of developing modern JavaScript applications. Once you get to the second section of the course, you will be spending 95% of the time getting your hands dirty. The recommended approach to follow the course is to take steps one at a time. Take them in the order which is present in here. However, if you are in a hurry to get your hands dirty and write a lot of code, then you can skip step 6 and step 7 and come back to them a little later. We'll talk about all the remaining sections of this course when we get to them. Let's get started with understanding the application architecture in the next step. Welcome back. I'm excited to help you learn full stack application development with Angular and Spring Boot, and I'm sure you are as excited as I am. In this step, let's discuss the high-level architecture of the application we are going to build in this specific course. Let's start with understanding the basic functionality of the application that we are going to build. We are going to build a to-do management application. Everyone has things you would want to do, you would want to learn. You can manage them in this specific to-do management application. You can add to-dos, delete to-dos, update. Other than that, we'll also have authentication and authorization features, typically login and logout capabilities. Let's now shift our attention towards the high-level architecture of this application. What we are going to develop is a full-stack web application. Whenever we talk about a full-stack application, we are talking about a front-end application which is talking to a back-end API or a web service. In this course, we'll be using Angular to build the front-end application. Angular is one of the most popular frameworks to build front ends. Angular has a variety of features like components, modules, forms, HTTP communication to talk with the web services. It makes it easy to develop front-end applications. Angular uses a language called TypeScript. If you're new to TypeScript, then TypeScript is nothing but modern JavaScript plus typing. We'll discuss a little bit more about TypeScript in a subsequent video. For now, it's sufficient to understand that the front-end application will be developed using the Angular framework, which would be based on a language called TypeScript. To build the RESTful API or the RESTful web services in the backend, we will be using the Spring Boot framework. We would be using Java as the language. Spring Boot is the #1 Java framework to build RESTful APIs and microservices. We will create multiple RESTful services for authentication as well as to-do management. As far as authentication is concerned, we will start with basic authentication and also discuss about how to use JWTs or JSON Web Tokens for authentication. We will be using the Spring Security Framework to build authentication around the RESTful API. Before we move on to the next step, let's discuss an important question. We are talking about full stack application. Why should you really build a full stack application? Why should you create a separate backend and a separate front end? There is a lot of complexity associated with building separate backends and front ends. You need to understand multiple languages. You need to understand multiple frameworks like Spring Boot and Angular. Why should you do that? The most important reason is to create a flexible architecture which can be extended to meet the future needs. Let's imagine that you would want to develop a native mobile application in future. Let's say you'd want to develop an iPhone app or you'd want to develop an Android application. Maybe you would want to connect with an Internet of Things device. In such kind of situations, you can completely reuse the backend API that is being exposed. The full stack application with a separate backend API or the RESTful API and a front end will give you more options to extend your architecture and create applications for different devices. In this quick video, we looked at the architecture of the application that we are going to create. We would create an Angular application talking to a RESTful API built on top of Spring Boot. We discussed why we build full stack applications. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye-bye. Welcome back. When we discussed the architecture of the application that we are going to build, we said we would develop the front end as an Angular application using TypeScript as the language. We discussed the fact that TypeScript is nothing but modern JavaScript plus types. Now, in this video, let's understand what is modern JavaScript, what is TypeScript. If you have built web applications a few years back, you would have written a lot of JavaScript. You would have played with the DOM, which is the document object model. I'm sure the JavaScript you wrote would not have looked something like this. A number of developers are surprised with the evolution of JavaScript in the last few years. Modern JavaScript supports features like classes. You even have annotations. However, these annotations in JavaScript are called decorators. You can import classes from modules. So modern JavaScript has all the features that are typically present in object-oriented programming languages like Java. Let's look at a quick history of the versions of JavaScript. You can see that the JavaScript versions are ES3, ES5, 6, 7 and 8. What does ES stand for? ES stands for ECMAScript. ECMAScript is nothing but a standard, and JavaScript is the implementation of that standard. It's like an interface and the class. A class is an implementation of the interface. Similar to that, whatever is specified in ECMAScript is implemented by JavaScript. The JavaScript versions are specified as ES3, ES5, 6, 7 and 8. You can see that there is a huge time gap between ES3 and ES5 as well as ES5 and ES6. All the versions which are after ES6. So ES6 and the versions after that are what I would typically call as modern JavaScript, because these are the versions which support classes, modules, and they help you to write modularized, well-organized JavaScript code. Of late, the year in which a ECMAScript standard has been released is also being used to represent the version. So ES6 was released in 2015. So this is also called ES 2015. So you have ES 2016, which is nothing but ES7. ES 2017 is nothing but ES8. Now, what is TypeScript? Why do we need it? TypeScript is nothing but JavaScript plus typing. What does that mean? The thing is, JavaScript is a loosely typed language. When you declare a variable, you cannot really define the type of the variable. Over here, we are saying var value. We are saying value is a variable, but we cannot say value is an integer variable. What happens because of this is you can assign a number 5, or you can assign a string, or you can even assign another object. This is a little different from a strongly typed language like Java. In Java, you can say a int value, which means value is an integer variable, and you can only have integer numbers in value. If you say value is equal to 5, it gives you a compilation error. The reason why typing is important is because it helps us to write maintainable code. Errors will be caught directly at compilation time. When you write code with TypeScript, it would look something like this. Over here, we are saying value is a number, and when we assign a numeric value to value, this is fine. However, if you assign a text value, this would give you a compilation error. The syntax is a little different, but essentially it exactly represents the same. TypeScript also has features like you can define types on method parameters. So over here in this method, this parameter number 1 I'm saying is a number. This number 2 is a number. We can also define the return type of a method. Over here we put a colon and declare the return type. The other thing TypeScript adds is the concept of interface and having the class implement the interfaces. In this course, we will use a learn as we go approach to learn modern JavaScript and TypeScript. Whenever we need features like a class, a constructor, a decorator, or an import, we will take a pause and discuss it to ensure that you have a good understanding before we use the feature. In this quick video, We discussed the fact that JavaScript has evolved a lot in the last few years. Modern JavaScript helps us to write maintainable JavaScript code using classes, modules, imports, decorators, and a wide variety of other features. TypeScript helps us write even safer modern JavaScript by adding type safety, with which you can identify errors at compile time itself. This video was just to give you a quick overview around TypeScript and modern JavaScript. We will look at a lot of hands-on examples as we go on further with this course. I'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. In this step, let's focus on installing Angular CLI. If you Google for Angular CLI, the first result would be cli.angular.io. Once you navigate to that web page, you'd see that Angular CLI is a command line interface for Angular. If there was ever an understatement, then this is the one. Angular CLI not only helps you create new Angular applications, but also it helps you to generate a lot of code while we are developing the Angular application. It helps us to run our application locally and also run our unit tests, integration tests, run our code quality checks and things like that. Installing Angular CLI is very easy. The first step is to launch up your terminal or command prompt. So I'm on Mac, I'm launching up my terminal, and you can see that the terminal has launched up. If you're on Windows, make sure that you are launching up your command prompt. All that you need to do is to click the start button, type in CMD, the CMD command prompt would come up, and make sure that you are running it as an administrator. So right click on it and make sure that you are running it as an administrator. You would have your terminal or command prompt launched up. So let's go ahead and check our node version which is installed. The way you can check your node version is node-v. Make sure that you at least have v8. If you want, you can go and check the npm version as well. So npm version that we have here is 6.4. Any version which is greater than 6 should be fine. If you don't have these versions right, then I would recommend to go and check the installation video for Node.js again and make sure that you have the right versions. Now we are all set to start installing Angular CLI. Angular CLI is present as a npm module. So all that you need to do is do npm install -g at angular/CLI. npm install -g at angular/CLI. I would want to get the latest version of Angular, that's 7. So I'll add at 7.0.3. So the command is very simple, npm install -g at angular/CLI at 7.0.3. If you have problems typing in, you can also copy it from here and append at 7.0.3 at the end. I would press enter now. What would happen now is npm would download the Angular CLI. One of the important things, if you're a Java developer, you can kind of think of npm like Maven, right? Maven downloads the dependencies, the plugins for you. So Angular CLI is almost like a Maven plugin, and we are using npm to download it for us. This download might take a little while if you're on a slow network or if you're doing this for the first time. When I ran the install, I got an error. It says missing write access to. So if you got this error, if you got the same error that I got, then it means you don't have admin permissions. So if you're on Windows, the way you can have admin permissions when you run your command prompt is by making sure that when you're launching up the command prompt, you're launching it as right click, run as administrator. So this will ensure that you have admin rights when you're launching up the command prompt. In Mac or on Linux, the way you can assign admin permissions is by using sudo. So I just need to type in sudo before the command. So I'm saying sudo space npm space install and the exact command as it was earlier. So now it would ask me for the administrator password. So go ahead and enter your password if you have any. I've entered my password and now you'd see that it would start doing the same process again. So this is very important. Whenever you installed a node module, make sure that you have admin rights. Now you can see that there is a local module installed. So it says plus Angular CLI at 7.0.3. Because I executed this on my machine earlier, it happened very fast down here. It might take a couple of minutes on a slow network. when the installation of Angular CLI is complete, we can go ahead and test it. The way you can check the version of the Angular CLI is by saying ng version. So ng space version. This should give you the version of Angular CLI which is installed. So over here I can see that I'm using Angular CLI version 7.0.3. You can also see the node version, and also you can see the versions of few other packages which Angular CLI makes use of. The most important thing for us is that any version which is greater than 7 is good enough. In this quick step, we installed Angular CLI, which would be used to generate our first Angular application. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye-bye. In the previous step, we have installed Angular CLI. Let's create our first Angular application using Angular CLI in this specific step. Before we get started with creating an Angular app, let's learn a little bit more about ng, the Angular CLI. So ng space help is what you need to type to get help on the Angular client. You can see all the different commands which are present in here. We have already used ng version. Ng version gives you what version of Angular CLI do you have. So ng space version would give you the version of the Angular CLI which is installed. Now let's go ahead and try ng help again. You can see that there are a wide variety of commands available. ng new, which is present over here, is used to create an Angular app. So whenever you want to create a new Angular project, you can say ng new. The other useful Angular CLI command is ng generate. When we talk about Angular applications, they are built using modules, components, services. The initial code for those modules and components can be generated by using the command ng generate. The other commands which are available are to build your code, to run the code quality checks which is called lint, to run the application, to run your unit tests, as well as your end-to-end tests. One of my favorite commands which is present in here is called ng serve. If I use the command ng serve, then as soon as I make a code change, the change would be automatically picked up by the application. Okay, enough theory now. Let's get to the practical stuff. Before we start creating an Angular app, you need to make a first decision, right? Where do you want to create it? So you need to cd down to the folder where you would want to create this specific project. I'd want to create the project in the directory that I'm showing on the screen right now. The most important thing is just have a subfolder called frontend so that all the frontend goes in there. So I'm cding to that folder, and over here is where we would want to create our Angular project. The way we would create an Angular project is by ng new and the name of the project. So new is the command, ng new, the name of the project that we would want to create is to do. If you press enter right now, Angular CLI would ask you a few questions. The first thing is, would you like to have Angular routing? Yes, I would have multiple screens and I would want to have a screen flow between them. So I would add Angular routing. We'll talk about Angular routing in detail a little later. I'll say yes. The next question it's asking me is, which style sheet format would you like to use? The default is CSS. You can use arrow buttons to scroll down and scroll up. I'd want to stick with CSS to keep things simple. You can see that it started creating your Angular application. There might be a few warnings. You can ignore them. The project is generated and it's actually now trying to build the project. If this is the first time you are building an Angular project on your machine, it might take a long while, a few minutes in certain circumstances. You can see that the installation is going on, and finally you would see the success message. Now if I want to list the contents of the directories, either ls or dir, you'd see that there's a folder called to do which is created in here. So let's cd into to do and type in ls or dir again. So if you're on Windows, the command is dir instead of ls. What you'd see is a project is created inside the folder to do, and there are a wide variety of files which are present in here. Make sure that you are inside the to do folder, and now you can start executing the command to build and run the application. So we would be using the command ng space serve. So type in ng space serve and press enter. You can see that it's listening on localhost 4200 and it's actually building the modules right now. So we need to wait until this is 100%. Okay, now it's 100% and it says compile successfully and it's opening up in the browser at this specific location. So the recommended browser that we would be using throughout this course is Google Chrome. So make sure that you're using Chrome as well. In Chrome, go ahead and type in localhost 4200 and just press enter. Cool. You'd see a page come up. It says welcome to To-Do, and you'd see a few links to the Angular blog, to tour of heroes and CLI documentation. If you had an error when you were running this command, make sure that you did a cd into the to-do folder. So make sure that you are inside the to-do folder before running the command ng-serve. That's a common mistake a lot of developers do. In this step, we were able to quickly generate an Angular app and we were able to run it. Our real journey starts from the next step, where we would start understanding what's happening in the background as well as we would start creating our own Angular code. I'm excited to bring all this to you and I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye. Welcome back. In the previous step, we created an Angular application using Angular CLI and we have launched it up and we saw a clean UI coming up. In this step, what we will do is we will import the project into our favorite IDE, which is Visual Studio Code. Let's get started now. I'm sure you would have the IDE Visual Studio Code installed. We had it as part of our installation section. When you launch up Visual Studio Code, this is the screen you would see. This is the welcome screen and you would be able to see a few help documents. You can see the recent projects. I had worked a lot to make sure that this course is perfect. And you can see other stuff about how you can customize and learn about the Visual Studio Code. If you have some time, I would recommend you to spend some time exploring the IDE. One of the things that I have done is I'm using a specific Visual Studio theme. So if you go to code preferences, if you're on Windows, it's file preferences, you can change the color theme. What I've done is I'm using a light Visual Studio theme. I like it very light so that it appears clear on the video and you can also see this very well on your mobiles. But if you like dark, then you can leave the default as it is. Now let's get to the first task of this step, which is to import the project in. The thing is, in Visual Studio Code, importing a project in is very easy. Either you can say open folder, or even more lazier way of doing it is just go to the folder where we have the project in. So To-Do is the project and just drag and drop it in, and that's it. The project would launch up. When the project launches up, you would see the Explorer view. So this view which we are seeing in here is the Explorer view. You can toggle it and toggle it down by clicking this icon which is present in here. Let's open up one of the files which is present in here, readme.md. Readme.md contains certain amount of documentation about the project that we have created. So it says it was generated using Angular CLI version 703. It says you can do ng-serve. That's what we are doing right now. And you can use this URL to launch it, and that's what we did already as well. So there's a lot of documentation in here. You might want to check that out. If you want to see this in full screen, so readme is now taking part of the screen and the Explorer is taking some of the part of the view. So you can toggle it by clicking this, or the other option is to use Control B or Command B. So Control B, Command B. So if you're on Mac, it's Command B. If you're on Windows or Linux, it's Control B. So use that and you'd be able to see the entire thing in full screen. So this is something which we'd be using frequently. So I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of that. We'll explore more about Visual Studio Code as we go further in this course. I'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. In one of the previous steps, we saw that when we run ng-serve inside the to-do folder, we were able to launch up the Angular application and we were able to look at it in the browser. In this step, let's explore ng-serve further, as well as let's look at a few other ng commands which you can run from your command line. I would want to look at a file called index.html. It's present in the source. So let's go to source, index.html. Inside this file is the title. So you see the to-do, this is where it's coming from. So let's go ahead and change this to something else. Let's say my to-dos application, and I'm saving it right now. What happens now is you'd see that I'm not doing anything on the browser right now. Within a little while, you'd see that it's auto loaded. That's what ngserve does. Ngserve would keep polling your code for changes, and as soon as there is a change, it would pick up, build it, and it would load it into the browser. Let's do another example. Let's go to source app component.html. This is where the actual content of this page is coming from. Welcome to do the Angular logo as well as the links which are present in here. For the most part, this is typical HTML except for something called interpolation which is being used in here. We'll look at it a little later, but for now, let's remove the H2 and the UL. So I'm removing the links which are present in here and saving it. You'd see that immediately the change is reflected on the browser. That's the most important thing that ngserve brings onto the plate. So as soon as you are making a change, you can see it reflect on your browser. Now let's look at a few other commands. ng space lint. ng space lint, when you run it, it would say linting, and it would finally print that there are no violations which are present. So the questions you might ask is, what is linting? Who's doing the linting? Linting is nothing but checking your code for coding standards. Because the code which we have is generated, we did not write a single line of code by hand yet. All these files pass the coding standards. What we'll do now is we'll introduce a coding standard violation. How can I introduce a coding standard violation? I'll go to Visual Studio Code, open up a file called app.component.ts. The way you can open up a file is by either searching through the Explorer and finding it and opening it, or you can press Command P or Control P. If you're on Mac, it's Command P, and if you're on Windows, it's Control P. You can type in app.component.ts and you should be able to load that specific file into the UI. You'd see that at end of every TypeScript file, there is a new line character. What I'll do is I'll remove the new line character. So now this file has only 10 lines. Let's go to the terminal and do nglint. What you'd see is that it would say there is a file which has a problem. It says lint errors found in the listed files. It says error app.component.ts file should end with a new line. That's what is the standard. Now you might be wondering, where are all these rules defined? All these rules are defined inside a file in our project, which is tslint.json. This is where all the rules are defined, and the end of file rule that we looked at is defined on line 17 right now. So it's end of file line true. So it should make sure that at the end of the file there is a new line character. The great thing about this file is the fact that you can customize it according to the needs of your particular project. Now that I added the new line, I can do nglint and you would see that there are no errors. Now let's get back to the commands and let's run a few more. Let's go on to the next command, which is ngbuild. What does ngbuild do? Let's run it and see what's happening. What you'd see is when you run ngbuild, it says there are specific files created: main.js, polyfills.js, runtime.js, styles.js, vendor.js. And when you go to the IDE, you'd see that there is a new folder which is present in here, which is the dist folder. If you open up the dist folder, you'd see a few files which are present in here: index.js, main.js, and all that kind of stuff. The great thing about this dist folder is you can take this to-do folder and put it behind any web server, and you'd be able to directly launch index.html and run the entire application. So you don't really need any of the other code which is present in here to launch these Angular applications. So typically when we deploy Angular applications to production, what we would do is we would execute ngdist and we would take this folder which is generated and put it on the web server. So ngdist makes it easy to deploy applications to other environments, for example test environments or production. All that you need to do is to copy this to a web server. The next command which we are going to look at is ngtest. Whenever we write applications, we are supposed to write a lot of unit tests. ng-test runs the unit tests which are written for Angular applications. Typically, unit tests for Angular are written in a framework called Jasmine, and we are using Karma to run the unit tests. You can see that all the tests ran and there are 0 failures. In front-end language, tests are called specifications. So these specifications are what are running, and you can see what are the specifications which ran. App component should create an app. App component should have a title to do. App component should render title in a h1 tag. If you want to run any of these specific tests again, you can click them, or you can click the app component to run all the tests again. Let's quickly look at where these tests are defined. There are a few important files related to unit tests. The first one is the karma conf.js. This is the configuration of the test runner, which is Karma. Other than that, there are a number of tests which are written as part of your Angular code. Typically, these files would have an extension .spec.ts. Spec stands for specification, that's basically the test. And if you open up this test file, you should see all the tests which are written. So these are the tests which ran earlier. So you can see all the tests which are present in here. And let's kill this by saying Control C. Now the other command which is present in here is ng e2e. E2e stands for ng end-to-end tests. So end-to-end tests are much more than the unit tests. Unit tests test individual components one at a time. With end-to-end tests, what happens is we would launch the entire Angular application. You can see that we are launching the Angular application at localhost 4200. It's still building up. It might take a little while. So now the application has been launched up, and now you would see that we are actually running the entire application and running tests around it. You'd see that over here it says should display welcome message, and it says one test successful. If you look at the logs, you would see that there was something called a Chrome driver which was downloaded, which is actually something related to the Selenium automation tests. The Chrome driver was installed, and the Chrome driver was used to launch up the tests. In Angular, the end-to-end tests are written using a framework called Protractor. Protractor is a layer around the Selenium API which helps us to write end-to-end tests. In this course, we will not be focusing on either the unit tests or the end-to-end tests. All the code for the end-to-end tests is present inside this folder E2E, and over here you would see also the protractor.conf.js. So this is the configuration for Protractor, which is an end-to-end integration testing tool. Angular.json, which is present in here, is the file which defines what should happen when we run specific commands. So we ran a number of commands, right? ng test, ng build, ng lint. The angular.json file is where all these commands are defined. In this quick video, we looked at a few commands which we can execute from the command line which are provided by Angular CLI. We looked at ng-lint, which is to execute coding standards. We saw that there is a file called tslint.json where all the lint rules, all the coding standards are specified. Next, we ran ng-build, and we saw that a dist folder was created which contains all the files which should be sufficient to deploy this specific Angular application to an external web server, external environment. We ran ng-tests, which ran all the unit tests which were created using the Jasmine framework in the spec.ts files using the runner which is defined as part of the karma conf.js. After that, we ran the command ng e2e, end-to-end, and all the tests which were defined in the end-to-end folder were executed. We saw that the entire application was launched up and Protractor was used to run the end-to-end tests. The idea behind this specific video is to give you a big picture overview of all the commands and what are the files associated with them. You might not really need to understand all these files in depth. It's sufficient to know where they are and what they are related to, and that's good enough for now. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye-bye. Welcome back. In the previous step, we looked at a few ng commands: ng dist, ng test, ng e2e, and ng lint. We looked at a few files which are related to each of those commands. When we look at our folder structure, there are still files which we have not really talked about. In this video, let's try and cover the other folders which are present in our workspace. When I open up the source folder, you'd see something called app. This is where all our Angular code would go into. When we build Angular apps, we will create them using something called components and modules, and all the components and modules will be present in this app folder. The assets folder is where all the images go into. The content which needs to be rendered as it is, like images, they all go into the assets folder. When we develop applications, we would want to deploy them in multiple environments: local environment, dev environment, QA, production, test. All the configuration for each of these environments go into the environments folder. Now that we looked at the important folders, let's look at the other files which are present in here. Let's start with the tsconfig.json. We know that we would be writing code in TypeScript. But do you know that your browser will not understand TypeScript and your browser only understands JavaScript? So whatever code that we write, it needs to be converted to JavaScript. So whatever TypeScript code that we write as part of our source code needs to be converted to TypeScript. That is specified as part of your tsconfig.json. We already looked at readme.md, which is kind of the documentation for this project. So if you have something to document about the project, you can put it in readme.md. We are building Angular applications, and we saw a number of commands which we were able to execute in the last step: ng serve, ng build, ng test, ng e2e. And all these things need a lot of external frameworks and tools. All these frameworks and tools are specified in the package.json. You'd see that all the frameworks are specified in here, all the packages are specified in here, as well as all the tools that we would need to be able to run the unit tests, integration tests, and to run our Angular application. Whatever modules you have defined in package.json are downloaded when you run npm install. Node Package Manager is the package manager we are using. It's very similar to Maven. So once you specify the dependencies in here, when we run npm install, all these dependencies are downloaded to the Node modules folders. The Node modules is where all your packages, that's basically your frameworks and also the tools which you need to build and run your project, are downloaded to. We did not really explicitly run npm install at all. Whenever we create a new Angular app using ng new, the npm install command is automatically executed. The git ignore file contains what are the different folders which should not be committed to version control. So when you commit this project to version control, all these folders would be ignored. Index.html, which you see in here, and the main.ts, we are inside the source folder now. So main.ts and the index.html, which is present in here, are the two things which are loaded up when we launch the Angular application. So these are responsible for bootstrapping the Angular application. At a high level, there is something called a root module which will be launched up by the test.ts, which will be included in index.html, and that's how the application gets bootstrapped. We will look at bootstrapping in detail a little later. The other files which are present in here is something called polyfills.ts. We know that different browsers have different levels of support for all the web standards. The same JavaScript code might not work in all the browsers. Polyfills.ts would take care of these browser incompatibilities and make sure that whatever code that we write would be compatible with all the browsers. The styles.css is where you specify the global application styles. So whatever styles, whatever CSS you would want to use across the application, you'd put it inside the styles.css. Test.ts is basically the starting point for running the unit test. So this is what is used when we run the ng test. In this quick video, we looked at all the other files which we were not able to cover as part of the previous step. The important ones which we discussed were package.json, where we define all the tools and frameworks that we make use of, and these are downloaded to our node modules folder when we run npm install. The npm install was automatically ran for us when we were creating the new Angular project. tsconfig.json defines how we would want to convert the TypeScript code we would write to JavaScript code which runs on the browser. The app folder contains all the important Angular code, typically modules, components, and all the other stuff which you would write as part of your Angular applications. As it contains things like images that you would want to use. Environments contain environment specific configuration. If you want dev specific configuration or production specific configuration, that's what goes into environments. Polyfills ensure that all the code that you write is compatible across all the browsers. Style.css contains the global styles, global CSS. And test.ts is the starting point for running our unit tests. The idea behind the last two steps is to give you a 10,000 feet overview on the project structure, the different folders, the different files which are present in here. It's not really necessary that you need to know the absolute details of everything which is present in here. It's sufficient if you know at a high level this is related to this, and that would help you when we start building the Angular app. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye-bye. Welcome back. In this video, let's get introduced to one of the most important concepts in Angular, which is called components. Let's consider that we would want to develop a page like this. We have a menu at the top, and we have a list of to-dos which are shown, and we have a footer. In Angular, the way we would develop this is as a set of components. So the entire page would be divided into a number of components. So we would have a menu component, we would have a list to-dos component, we would have a footer component. Each of these components are responsible for displaying the view, that's basically the HTML, the styling, that's basically the CSS, as well as the code to react to the user actions. So when user clicks update, when user clicks delete, when user clicks add to do, what needs to be done, all that is handled by the view logic which is present in that specific component. This menu component is responsible for showing the list of menu items, which is highlighted, which is not highlighting, the styling for that, and handling the click of the events, if home is clicked, if to-dos is clicked, or logout is clicked. Whenever we build Angular applications, we first start thinking about what should be the components which should be created. Typically, a component is associated with the template, which is basically the HTML, how should it be shown, the styling, which is basically the CSS, how should the elements be styled, and the code, how should you really respond to user actions. This is written in TypeScript. When we look at most components in Angular, you'd see that the template file is having an extension of .component.html. The style file has a component.css extension, and the code file has a component.ts extension. TS stands for TypeScript. When you look at our workspace, there is one component which is already present in here. It's called the app component, and you'd see that the extensions exactly match to what we have seen earlier. So we have a HTML template, the component.html. That's basically the app.component.html. We have the styling in app.component.css. This file is empty for now, and we have the code which is present in app.component.ts. In Angular, you would indicate that something is a component by using something called a decorator. The decorator is very similar to annotations in Java. We use a decorator at component to indicate that the app component is a component, and we have a few attributes which are specified as part of the component decorator. The first one is the selector. Selector is basically the tag name for this component. So if I want to make use of this component, what tag name should I use? That's the selector. So if you look at index.html, which is where this particular component is used, it says app root. The next thing which is present in here is something called app.component.html, which is the template URL. So what we are saying is, where is the location of the HTML template for this specific component? We said it's in the app.component.html. The other thing which we specify in here is where is the styling for that specific component. So the app.component.css is where typically the styling which is specific to this specific component is present. You can see that as part of our component code, we have some data. We have member variables which are present in here. This member variable is actually mapped to this value in here. What we are using in here is something called interpolation. So what it does is it takes the value which is present in here and puts it in here. So let's say I would want to create another one. So let's say I'm saying message is equal to welcome to in 28 minutes. What I can do in here is I can use interpolation, and I can put within flower brackets or braces, I can put in the message. You would see when you look at the page, you would see welcome to in 28 minutes also as part of your H1. Whatever we're doing in here is called binding. We are taking some data from the component and showing it in the view. In this quick step, we looked at components. We said all Angular applications are built up of a number of components. Each component has the HTML or the template, the styling or the CSS, and code to handle the view actions. This code is written in TypeScript. We discussed the fact that add component decorator is what makes this app component a component. We looked at the attributes which are part of the add component decorator, the template URL and the style URL, as well as the tag which is used to represent this element. And we looked at the fact that whatever data is present as part of the component, we can use it in the template by using interpolation. I'll leave you with an exercise. What I would recommend you to do is create a few more data elements as part of this and make sure that you use them in your app.component.html. Play around with it, and I'll see you in the previous video. We looked at the basics of components. In this video, let's play around with the app component a little bit more. I'll start with going to the app.component.ts, and over here what I'll do is I would want to directly include the entire template in here. Instead of actually putting the URL to where the HTML is present, you can also include the exact template. So let's say I would want to show H1, and let's start with just putting the title in. Oops, I'm using caps lock. Let's remove that. Let's make this H1, and this should be H1. What would happen if I go and refresh the page? Oops, it says this module cannot be found. What it's saying is I'm not able to locate the template URL. The thing is, I would need to change the attribute to template. So if you say it's template, then you can directly define the template in here. So you can see that nav to do is displayed. So just the H1, because that's the only thing which is present in the template. What I'll do is I'll undo the change. Let's go back to where we were earlier. I'll comment this out and paste this in. So what we are doing is we are replacing the template URL. Instead of the template URL, we are using template, and thereby we can actually put the complete code of the component right here. If you'd want, you can do something like that with the styles as well. What we'll do now is we'll comment this out, and let's continue using the template URL because we would want to see a lot of code. Now, if you go to the template URL, what we'll do in here is create a additional div. let's create a div component content. Now what we'll do is index.html, let's go here, and also over here let's create a div. So this div is actually index.html content. So we created two divs, one in the index.html, one in the app.component.html. If you look at the screen right now, you'd see the content in here, right? So the content is displayed as part of the index.html. Now let's style the divs. So I'll say div background color, I'll just make it bees. Let's refresh the page. You can see that just the component alone gets the background color bees. The content in the index.html does not get the style. So whatever you put in here does not apply to all the divs which are present in here. Whatever content you put in app.component.css only applies to the components. The scope of the styles which you are specifying in here is restricted to the component, and that's awesome. Let's comment this out. The appearance does not really look good, so let's comment this out. The way I'm doing it is Control/ or Command/. If you do that, it gets commented out. And now we would be back to the usual stuff. In this quick video, we tried to play around with the component. We tried to create a template directly in here by using the template property, and we tried to create a simple style inside the app.component.css, and we were able to see that this style was affecting only the specific component. I would recommend you to try and play around with the template and the template URL and try and understand it more as an exercise. I'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. If you are a Java developer who's coming into the front-end world, one of the most important things to get used to is the syntax of TypeScript. You would see that this looks similar to a Java class, but there are quite a number of things that you would need to get used to. You might be wondering, if let's say I would want to create a new component, it might be a lot of effort. I need to create 4 files manually, link them up. There is a lot of effort which is involved in doing that. The thing is, Angular CLI makes it very easy to create components. In this step, let's create a component and see how easy it is to do that. Typically, we have one window where we have the ngserve running. I have all my code in this to-do folder, and I have cd'd to this folder in here, and we have done ngserve to launch up the application, and that's what we are seeing in here. What I would typically do is I would open up another terminal window or another command prompt cding to the same folder. So I'm opening up another folder. If you do the present working directory, it's exactly the same as what I have in here. So I have 2 command line windows. One of them is running ngserve, and the other one we would typically use to create the components, to create modules, to create services. Whatever you'd want to create, you'd use the other window to create it. So the advantage of doing this is as soon as new code is generated, the code would automatically be picked up. I don't need to stop ngserve, create a component, and then start ngserve again. If you'd see that the new code you are writing is not picked up, make sure that you are inside the same working directory in both these folders. Now, let's get started with creating a component. How do I create a component? It's very simple. It's ng-generate, and what do we want to create? We want to create a component, ng-generate component. Actually, you can also run it as ng, g, and c. So this is kind of a shortcut. Once you are more familiar with Angular, maybe you can use that. For now, let's stick with the usual one, ng-generate component. And we would need to specify the name of the component that we would want to create. Let's say we would want to start with creating the welcome page. So I would want to start creating the welcome component. So ng-generate component welcome. One of the most important things that you need to understand with ng-generate is there is no rollback. Once the component is created, once it's added, you'll not be able to roll it back. So it's very important to make sure that you get the names right first time. So welcome, So check the name before you press enter. The other thing is I'm not saying welcome component, I'm saying just welcome, and you'd see that it would create welcome component for us. So ng generate component welcome. You'd see that there are 4 files which are created and 1 file which is updated. What's happening? The 4 files that are created, that we would expect, right? So we have the component.html, which is the template, the CSS, which is the style, the TS file, which would contain the code, the TypeScript code. This is the test file, which is typically generated, and we would keep ignoring it. The interesting change is what is done to app.module.ts. It says an update is done to app.module.ts. Let's look at what update is done. When I open up the app.module.ts, let's do a Control B or Command B to make sure that we are seeing it in full screen. If you do that, you'd see that there is a welcome component which is added in the declarations. We'll talk about ng module a little later. This stands for Angular module. Every component that we create as part of an Angular application should be associated with a Angular module. And the declarations indicate what are the different things, different components that are part of this particular ng module. You see that the welcome component is automatically added in as part of this particular declarations array. This particular module contains 2 components, app component and welcome component. Now let's go on to the Explorer and look at where the welcome component is created. So inside the app folder, there is a folder called welcome, and inside the welcome, all these 4 files are created. You can see that it says, the HTML says welcome works. The spec file contains the default test, and the .ts files contains the basic component. You can see that the name of the component is welcome component. It's very important. We just specified welcome in here, but the component which is created is welcome component. So we don't really need to say welcome component when we are creating the component. That's kind of a typical mistake which a lot of beginners make. You would see that the default selector or the default tag name which is for this specific thing is app-welcome, and you would see that the template URL and the style URLs are appropriately matched. The interesting fact to note is the use of implements on init, which is present in here. The thing is, modern JavaScript does not really have the concept of interfaces. This is something which is a TypeScript concept which we are making use of in here. So we have an interface called onInit. The interface defines a method called ngOnInit. So what we are doing is, in the welcome component, we are implementing the method ngOnInit. You'd see that if I remove this, there's a compilation error. You'd see that it says I'm not implementing the interface. So this is very similar to Java, right? In Java, when you implement an interface, you have to implement all the methods which are present in there, or you can make it abstract. Let's not worry about it right now. So the ngOnInit, what would happen is this method would run when this component is initialized. Let's save this. Let's look at the application. You'd see that there is no change because we have not used this component anywhere. Now I would want to include this component. I would want to show this component. How can I do that? One of the ways I can do that is I can go to the app.component.html and I can include the tag app welcome and save it. Let's see what would happen. When it loads up, you see welcome works. Isn't this awesome? So what we did is we have included the component that we have created inside another component. So the welcome component is now included as part of the app component. In this step, we created the welcome component and we have included it as part of the app component.html. I would recommend you to do an exercise and create another component and include it as part of the app.component.html as well. I would recommend you to play around with it as much as possible to understand a little bit more about components, and I'll see you in the next step.